चक्षुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरुवे Srimate Bhakti Swamini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Krishna Caitanya Caritamrta Namaste, Devi, Gauravana Kuchare, Namaste, Sanyavagi, Sati, Sutta. All again to them that said, and do not collect that. Sri Caitanya Vistam, Stapitam, Demalutare, Sanyam, Rupakadhanam, Rati Sapandatikam. Once the coconut tree was dark, we was in the sun, deep down, Caitanya Caritamrta has visited the Brahmin whose name was Karma. Did that link come off?
It just came off and it's back on. Good, that's fine.
He had visited the Brahmana whose name was Karma. And that Brahmana, even though he was living, practically speaking, in a good situation, when he was in contact with Mahaprabhu, he saw his good situation as very difficult. I didn't want to use the word miserable, so I didn't. That was clever, yeah, wasn't it? He saw his situation as quite difficult because material life is a struggle for existence. It's just unavoidable. And that which we had hoped or imagined was going to be the cause of our happiness, it's always so mixed. And then there's the ultimate end of material life. Having a material body is dying, and it's such an odd thing when we consider ourselves as very important, and we all think ourselves as sort of quite central to existence. But then, if you think about it, in 100 years from now, who will even know we ever existed? And maybe if we had some very dear friends or family, then maybe they will, but then in 100 years after that, who will even know that we or they existed? And every once in a while you get a great, great, famous, powerful, extraordinary person who a few hundred years or even a few thousand years people know he existed. But compare that to 10,000 years or 100,000 years, it makes us appear quite insignificant, and all our problems and all our great achievements, they're all insignificant when looked at from the point of view of eternity. So therefore Shastra says, Sub Asub, or doing something auspicious or doing something inauspicious, ultimately is useless on the material level. And it's ultimately inauspicious. Because, and this is the unique perspective of the Vedic civilization that is really meant to be distributed to the world, because the world is certainly in need of a proper perspective of life that's bigger than one's own selfishness, certainly, or one's extended selfishness, is that the real problems of life, is birth, death, old age, disease, and it's not possible to solve them on the material level. But unless a human being inquires about, as Sanatana Goswami inquired from Mahaprabhu, as we shall hear a bit later in the Madhya Lila, is that I don't want to suffer. I don't want to suffer, but yet suffering is imposed upon me. I don't want to become old and invalid, and yet that's also imposed upon me in old age and ultimately death. And then death is such an odd thing because people will cry. Well, some people may be happy when our time comes, but people will cry. But then life forces them to, engages them and get on with life. And ultimately they have to also forget that we're gone, and they just have to get on with their own lives. So this isn't a Sunday morning misery class, but it's even though we did start in that way, I have to admit it. But rather there is a positive part of it, is that life is really meant for solving the actual problems of life. Human life is meant to inquire about who we actually are. Why don't you just take a moment and internally think about who you think you are. And who do you experience yourself as? Who do you experience yourself as? Who do you experience yourself as? Wait. Who do you experience yourself as? Yeah, depends what time of the day it is and what side of the bed I woke up on. It's so funny the way that the mind works. Sometimes it just goes from thinking that I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and then it can just flip to the other side as I'm completely useless and so full of faults. I don't even know how. Yeah, but we just think that we're. Yeah, the mind is so amazing, and then as the Bhagavad Gita explains, that the mind is so amazing, and it flickers so much between I want this, I don't want that, I like this, I don't like that, and it can just go so fast between something that someone that I like so much and someone in the next moment I can't stand that person. And this is going to be the cause, the mind is going to be the cause of our next birth, where we take our birth, and it's so flickering. So that means that, practically speaking, we're in a dangerous position unless our mind is fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna, or if we're not even looking at it from our point of view. But unless the mind can be directed where one wants it to be, then our position is very precarious. Very precarious, very dangerous, because it will dictate our future. So of course for a materialistic person, completely atheistic or materialistic person, the only solace when you think of that point, that the mind is so flickering, and it's so dangerous, compared by Rishabdev Maharaj to a wild animal. That's so the only solace for a materialistic person is that when I die, then everything's finished. So that's not a very very promising solace. It's not, that I don't exist anymore. And it's also not even accurate, and it's not even what we perceive. And the scientific people don't believe in the existence of the soul, say. But can they prove that? Can they prove that there's no soul? What do you think, Braj Mohan? How do you prove that we're just a combination of chemicals? But by one way would be what? If you were a scientist and you could do it, you could mix some chemicals together and make life. That would prove it. But they can't do it. So it's such a solace that I don't exist anymore. It's so disappointing. So that Brahmana named Korma, when he came in the presence of Mahaprabhu, he just didn't want to leave that presence. But yet he knew that Mahaprabhu, being a mendicant, a traveling sannyasi, acting as a pariprajakacharya, that he was going to leave the next day. So there's the way to look at it from Caitanya Mahaprabhu's point of view, or the wandering sannyasi's point of view, and he just stays in a place for a day. Sometimes it's a comfortable place, sometimes it's an uncomfortable place. But to be able to survive and flourish, one will be forced. One will be forced to get one's happiness from a deeper internal level, and that's the purpose of being a sannyasi, because we tend to seek our happiness on a superficial level and be satisfied with the superficial level that's going to be ripped away by the force of time. But you can't do that when you're just walking and being inconvenienced by the elements and inconvenienced by where you're staying, or you can't rely on where you're going to stay, you can't rely on the food, the quality of the food. If you get something one day, you eat it. If you don't, you fast. So either you become extremely miserable, or you find your happiness on a deeper level, on a soul level. That's the real position of happiness. So it forces the issue to arrange the circumstances of one's life, that it forces us, or it's favorable to us getting happiness on a deeper level, is the essence of true culture that forces spiritual life to grow within it. But so that's looking at it from Caitanya Mahaprabhu's point of view. From the sannyasi's point of view, you're traveling like that. And then you stay at someone's house. And they take care of you according to their capacity. And you appreciate that. And how do you reciprocate with them? You try to do good to them. But how can you do good for them when you can't pay for your meal? You can't. What do? So you give them a jewel. You give them a jewel that is the hardest thing to find, and that jewel is transcendental knowledge. And according to your capacity, you give greater or lesser amounts of that jewel, but your mood is giving. So you have nothing on one level, but your mood is always giving. So it's just the opposite of the materialistic mentality, when you have so much on the external level and your mood is not to give but to take all the time. So the spiritual mentality is exactly the opposite of the materialistic mentality. Just the opposite. One is giving and one is taking. So Mahaprabhu, being the perfect acharya, acting as the perfect acharya, perfect teacher, was in that mood of giving. And then what was the mood of the Brahmana, Koma, that he saw that Mahaprabhu, he was in the presence of the light and his darkness disappeared, and he didn't want to go back to the realm of darkness. So he asked Mahaprabhu, please, can I come with you? I want to stay in the presence of the sun that dispels darkness, ignorance. And Mahaprabhu replied, don't speak like that, but rather I will tell you how to keep my presence with you continuously. And you remember what he said? And remember anything of what he said? Chant, yes. Stene, stita, yeah. Yeah. He said, hear. First he said, you hear. Stay wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, but just hear Srimad Bhagavatam, hear Bhagavad Gita, get this, just fill up your consciousness. Fill up your consciousness with thoughts of Krishna. Fill up your consciousness and let your desires shift from the external, superficial, to the internal, the eternal. The external, superficial means that which is always changing. Let consciousness shift from that which is always changing to that which is eternal. Means our relationship with Krishna. So by hearing about Krishna, then Srinvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Sravana Kirtanam. Then Vidyantasto Krishna within the heart. If we become eager to hear about Krishna, Krishna from within the heart, He purifies us. We do our best externally, but from inside, He purifies us. Vidyantasto Yuvadrani Vidanoti Sanatsatam. Do you know that verse? Srinvatam Svakata. That's it.
Srinvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Sravana Kirtanam.
What's the last line? Vidanoti? Yeah. So the process actually works if we become eager to hear about Krishna. But then there's another part of the process that he said, that you will have my association always. Instead of you trying to chase after me, in one sense, and keep up with me, if you keep your heart, your consciousness proper by hearing about Krishna, and then Yadi Deka Tarika Krishna blessing, and distribute to others, then you will have my company. Tomana Sanama Bishops. I know that verse, but I don't know that verse at the same time. You know what? Kabuna Badive Tomara Vishya Taranga Punarapi Tane, in this very place, again, Pade, you will be able, Morasaga, you will have my association. Just by staying there, by following these things, you will have my association. So then, Kaviraj Goswami has described this, Mahaprabhu's interaction with the Brahmin named Kurma. And then he says that then, although it's just going to be described once how he interacted with Kurma, this is what Mahaprabhu did continuously wherever he traveled, because he would mostly stay at someone's house at night, and this is how he interacted with the people, and wherever he was, people wanted to be with him. because he was so charismatic, so powerful, like a magnet. He attracted people's consciousness due to his purity, due to his consciousness. And what was his consciousness? It was filled with, it was Krishna Chaitanya. His consciousness was filled with Krishna. And that's the essence of the instructions that we're given, is that we want to fill our consciousness with Krishna somehow or another, fill our consciousness with thoughts about Krishna. Because if we don't fill our consciousness with thoughts about Krishna, our mind, our consciousness is going to be filled with the most incredible things all day long. What does incredible mean? The literal meaning of incredible. Incredible. Linda?
Something like unbelievable.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. I mean, if you actually kept track of what you were thinking, you know, thought by thought by thought, what to speak of, what others are thinking, you'd say, this is incredible, this is unbelievable what my mind goes through. One moment after the next, after the next, after the next. It's actually incredible. Incredible is a little bit more higher than unbelievable is. Incredible means it's amazing too. Not only is it unbelievable, it's amazing, the kind of flips and backflips and curses and crying and desires. And what I always end up saying when I describe the crazy mind, I'm afraid to say my crazy mind, but that's what I mean, is that just imagine if you had a loudspeaker hooked up directly from your mind and that others could hear what was going on. Can you imagine how many friends you would have? You wouldn't have any. And nor would you want to be friends with anyone else. So fill the consciousness with thoughts of Krishna, somehow or another, somehow or another, somehow. So this is what Mahaprabhu would tell people wherever you are, wherever he went. And then the next morning came. So in text 133, thus Kaviraj Goswami says, I have described the Lord's behavior elaborately in the case of Korma. In this way you will know Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dealings throughout South India. And then the next morning came. And what was going to happen? He's leaving. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would remain at night in one place, and the next morning after bathing he would start again. So when Mahaprabhu left, now what do you think the Korma Brahmin, what do you think he did? Do you think he just said, see you later? See you later, right? You think he said that? No. The Brahmin Korma followed him a great distance. Why did he follow him? Because he couldn't help it, practically speaking. And this is someone he just met for a few hours. But Mahaprabhu was so attractive because he was Krishna Chaitanya. But eventually, Lord Chaitanya took care to send him back home. Now, the pastime shifts a bit to something another amazing pastime. There was also a Brahmin named Vasudeva, who was a great person, but he was suffering from leprosy. Indeed, his body was filled with living worms. Now, How many of you, when you go to get blood taken out for, they want to test your blood, do you look? Do you? No, I know you wouldn't look, right?
I would.
You would?
Yes, yeah.
You want to see what it's like inside, huh?
Curious.
How many of you look? Raise your hand if you look. Okay, that's interesting. How many of you don't look? So if we sample the population here, I'd say it looks like about 20% look. And I was talking to one devotee who recently had an angiogram done. And what they do is, and you watch, they do it in the arm nowadays, and then you watch the blood, and they basically put a camera, and they see what's going on in your heart and things like that. And it's done with a local anesthetic, so you're not asleep, you're awake. So you're watching your own heart on the thing. But it's like watching a movie or something like that. It doesn't have anything to do with you, practically speaking. In fact, it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's the machine that's working. So anyway, now imagine if you looked down at your arm and you saw big sores on your arm and there were worms living in the sores. And they were all alive. Now how do you think you deal with that? Be quite unnerving, wouldn't it? Well, Vasudeva was in that situation with leprosy. Indeed, his body was filled with living worms. Although suffering from leprosy, the Brahmin Vasudeva was enlightened. What does enlightened mean?
And somebody gets the knowledge.
Okay, but,
Yeah.
okay, you've taken it one step further. What does it literally mean? Well, if you would say someone was darkened, what would that mean?
Coming into light.
Huh?
Coming back to the light.
No, if he was darkened. Because that means his consciousness was covered with darkness. Darkness means ignorance. So covered by ignorance. Enlightened means one's consciousness is enlightened. It's filled with light. Not darkness, not ignorance, but knowledge. So what is the knowledge that his consciousness was filled with? Vasudeva's consciousness was because he was enlightened, and he said earlier that he was a great soul. So he was a great soul because his consciousness was not touched by ignorance, darkness, but rather he understood that he wasn't his body. So that is a deep realization when you pick up, well, this is what he did. He was enlightened. As soon as one worm fell from his body, he would pick it up and place it back again in the same location. He didn't want to inconvenience the poor worm. Now, that, you can't bluff that. Not even Nikunj would do that, I think. Right? Curious, what would happen if this worm... But he would pick it up and place it back in the same location. So this is describing this person named Vasudeva, who was in an unfortunate situation, but yet he was a great soul, materially unfortunate situation, but he was a great soul, that he didn't have the ignorance of considering himself a body, his body. And then this great soul, he heard one night, he heard that that the Goswami had come, that Mahaprabhu had come. He heard about his arrival. And in the morning, he came to see the Lord, at the house of Korma. So he had heard this amazing person had arrived, and there he was in such a suffering material situation. He heard that this great, great exalted person had arrived. So he, being enlightened himself, immediately wanted the association of that person. So in the morning, he came to see the Lord at the house of Korma. But when the leper Vasudeva came to Korma's house to see Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he was informed that the Lord had already left. The leper then fell to the ground, unconscious. Now why? Tried to examine his consciousness, that he was enlightened. He didn't have association. He didn't associate with his body. You couldn't be picking up the worms and putting them back in if you thought they were. That was your body. It was you. So, but still, he didn't have desires on the material platform, but he had deep spiritual desires. Obviously, otherwise why would he have been so disappointed when he found that Mahaprabhu wasn't there? He wanted that the association of a great soul, even though he had never met Mahaprabhu before. It just said that he heard that Sunila, he heard that a great Gosai had come. And immediately the next morning, he went to see him and found that he wasn't there, and he fell unconscious to the ground. So sincere. Then, when Vasudeva, the leper Brahmin, was lamenting due to not being able to see Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, the Lord immediately returned to that spot. Tanre Alinga Prabhu, Tanre Alinga, and then embraced him. So, when you hear that, what do you think? What do you think? And so many different things that we could be thinking, and probably since there's so many different people in this room, we're all thinking different things. What do you think when you hear that? Yes.
He really did not identify with his body at all.
Yeah, he really didn't. Yes, anyone else would like to say what they... Yes, Miss Baba.
I was just reminded of my Lord Chaitanya Vaishnava Goswami in a similar state. He didn't mind that his body had open wounds.
Would you embrace someone with leprosy? With worms? Just remember that situation. What do you think? Just say what you're thinking. Yes.
He was in a material unfortunate situation, and on the other hand he was fully attached to Mahaprabhu. So I recall Kunti Maharani's prayer about Akinchana Vittara, that Krishna is the asset of a person who is materially exhausted.
He's the property of a person who is materially exhausted. Yeah.
So Mahaprabhu came and embraced him.
Yeah. Did you raise your hand?
Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reciprocates with the sincerity of a devotee.
He was sincere. He didn't have anything else except his sincerity. Anyone else?
It was just nice hearing the words that he returned. So personal.
Yeah. He's personal in his reciprocation. He didn't return because he forgot his credit card and his wallet and his keys. He returned because, why did he return? Why did he return?
Because that was what would be pleasing to the Lord.
Excuse me?
Because that was the pleasure.
Yeah, because he wanted to. And by nature he's compassionate. Is that your experience of Krishna? By the way, just question, do you perceive him as compassionate, kind, cruel? Because that's just our own consciousness. He immediately returned to that spot and embraced him. When Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu touched him, both the leprosy and his distress went to a distant place. Dukkha Samge Kushtadvayagela. Indeed, Vasudev's body became very beautiful to his great happiness. So he sounds like he was in distress, but yet before. The Brahmin Vasudeva was astonished to behold the wonderful mercy of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, and he began to recite a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, touching the Lord's lotus feet. Kraham daridra papayan kra Krishna sina ketanam brahma banduriti smaham babhubhyam pariramritaha. He said, who am I, a sinful poor friend of a Brahmana? This was spoken by Sudama. And who is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, full in six opulence? Nonetheless, he has embraced me with his two arms. Prabhupada says in his purport that this verse was spoken by the Sudama Brahmana, Srimad Bhagavatam 10.81.16, in connection with his meeting with Krishna. The Brahmin Vasudeva continued, O my merciful Lord, such mercy is not possible for ordinary living entities. Such mercy can be found only in you. Upon seeing me, even a sinful person goes away due to my bad bodily odor. Yet you have touched me. Such is the independent behavior of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, this is all quite amazing, but what happens next is even more amazing, because this has just happened to him. Just try to understand what it was like. He had heard, there he was, very good-hearted, but in distress because of his leprosy. Then he heard that a great soul had come nearby, that he didn't even have to go to that, thousands of miles away on pilgrimage. He had come to his own village. So immediately he went to see him, or the next morning he went to see him, and then he was so disappointed that he fainted when he heard that the Lord wasn't there, that Mahaprabhu wasn't there, that great soul, that Gosai wasn't there. He was so disappointed, the depths of his disappointment was so great that he fainted. And then Mahaprabhu came back and embraced him and cured him of his leprosy. And there, where he once had a worm-ridden body, now it was a beautiful, effulgent body. So he was so overwhelmed with joy and happiness and appreciation of Mahaprabhu's mercy. But yet, the next verse will describe that he had a worry. He had one worry. Can you imagine what that worry is, unless you already know? Being meek and humble, the Brahmin Vasudeva worried that he would become proud after being cured by the grace of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. He was afraid of becoming proud. Now, one would ask the question, if someone, say if you're a poor man, and someone, just out of the kindness of their heart, someone who you didn't even know, just gave you a lot of money. Now, you would think, no, I have nothing to become proud of. I'm fortunate, but just someone was very kind to me. There's no cause of my being proud. I didn't do anything. In fact, I was in a terrible position before, feeling very sorry for myself. So is there any reason, logical reason, why I should or could become proud if someone just gives me a gift? And the answer is no. There is no logical reason why someone would be proud. But yet, that's what everyone does. The nature of the mind is that pride, even if it's just a gift, an undeserved gift, we become very strongly tend to become proud of that. And when one looks at it from the point of view of knowledge, whatever it is that we're proud of, whatever quality that we have, that we think ourselves better than others about, is only a gift. Now one could say, well, I know the law of karma, so I must have done something in my previous life that has given me this gift. So in that sense, I should be proud of it because it was due to my action that I have this gift that others don't have. But considering the fact that we have had countless lives, that means that we have countless amounts of karma, unlimited karma, terrible karma, good karma, wonderful karma, mixed karma. So the choice of the exact karma we get, or the exact prescription of the karma we get in this life, the prarabdha karma that we have in this life, is really just a gift of Krishna. It's a gift of the super soul. Because it's like we have a room full of karma. So out of that, we just get, all we can get is one handful. So which handful do we get? It's up to Krishna. But he was afraid of becoming proud. Now, how many of us have that as our greatest fear? That I may become proud. Proud that he's been given a gift by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, what is Mahaprabhu going to prescribe for him? Is he going to say, don't worry, it's all right? No, because this is the tendency of every conditioned soul, to become proud. There's arrogance built into the false ego. And that's what it means. One of the main things that a false ego has is pride and envy. To protect the Brahmana, Kaviraj Goswami says, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu advised him to chant the Hare Krishna mantra incessantly, without stop, nirantara. By doing so, he would never become unnecessarily proud. Nirantara kahi tume Krishna Krishna naam, na hobe abhiman. Kabu toma na hobe abhiman. Nirantara kaha tume Krishna Krishna naam. To protect the Brahmana, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu advised him to chant the Hare Krishna mantra incessantly. By doing so, he would never become unnecessarily proud. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu also advised Vasudeva to preach about Krishna and thus liberate living entities. As a result, Krishna would very soon accept him as his devotee. What do you find interesting about that? Anyone like to say? I do have something in my mind that I found interesting. But what do you find interesting, if anything? I'll read it again. And I'm reading it. You know that I'm going to ask you what you find interesting. So listen. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu also advised Vasudeva to preach about Krishna and thus liberate living entities. As a result, Krishna would very soon accept him as his devotee. What do you find interesting about that? Yes.
Mahaprabhu is moved to he's again repeating preach about Krishna.
Mahaprabhu was moved to preach, chant and preach, help others. So that's what he told. He told Kurma that. He told Vasudeva that, and Prabhupada in the same mood told us that. Anything else? Can you find anything? Kainamai, what did you find interesting?
That Krishna will accept him and devotee.
Yeah, I also found that interesting. Krishna will accept you if you do this. As a result, Krishna would very soon accept him as his devotee. Because there's one part that we have to accept, that we're Krishna's servant. And we think that's the main part. But actually it's the other part, Krishna accepting us, that is actually the main part. And what would cause Krishna to really accept us? I mean, bring us into his inner circle. What do you think would cause Krishna? What do you think?
Sincere love.
Yeah, because then you're trustworthy. You don't even, if you had to choose one of those two words, you said sincere love. If you had love, you can't have insincere love, right? Because if it's insincere, it's not love. So if we actually have love for Krishna and sincerely want to be his servant, then Krishna will accept us. And then no more problems. So that's how Prabhupada translated the Mahamantra at first for the devotees. O Lord, O energy of the Lord, O Krishna, Srimati Radharani, please accept me as your servant. It was that side, asking Krishna, requesting Krishna, begging Krishna, please allow me to serve you. That is the greatest fortune, to be able to serve. The greatest fortune. And sometimes I take services as
to be granted.
I was thinking, oh, you have to give me more, you're giving me some more work to do. As if I already don't have enough. And yes, of course, everyone has their limitations of what they can do, and there's unlimited service required. So, but aside from that, it's really the most fortunate thing. And regardless of what that service is, it's fortunate, whether it's sweeping the floor of the temple or this is the example Prabhupada would usually give, sweeping the floor of the temple or doing the deity worship. Krishna sees it as the same as service. Now here's Prabhupada's purport. So I found it so interesting that amongst all the interesting things, that it's like always chant and preach. So there's a process. Chant and then preach or participate in the preaching, support the preaching, or directly preach in one way or another. And as a result, then Krishna will soon accept you. So why will Krishna accept you? Because, and what does it have to do, doing those sort of simple, formulaic things? Why would Krishna accept you? Well, one reason is that it's not easy to do these things over a long period of time with sincerity. You can chant when one is chanting, but one's mind gives one so much trouble, and one will give up the chanting, or so many different things the mind will say. I don't have any time, etc. And then the second thing is preaching, and even though you are quote liberating living entities, it's not easy because people don't want to be liberated. They want to just continue and continue doing whatever they're doing. And that's why they're doing it. That's why they're in that situation, because they desire to be in that situation to some degree. So people don't want to be liberated. They don't want to hear this. People just want to continue. But the problem is, of course, that you can't continue. You can't continue ultimately because one will be forced out of the body by time. But one can't continue because the material world doesn't let anyone continue at anything. Because it's what to speak of it being not ecstatic. It's not even static. It's not even stable, the material situation. It's always changing. Because the nature of the living entity in the material world, you get used to, you get satisfied wherever you are, whatever the situation is in time, but you can't even stay in that situation. That's the nature of material existence. It's always shifting and changing. Just as an example of that, there's the great Chinese sage in Chinese, his name in Cantonese is Confucius. English translation is Confucius. So he used to use this I Ching book and to see what the future would be. And so he would be prepared, just like someone may listen to the weather report to know if it's going to rain, so you prepare by carrying an umbrella or something. So he would do that regularly. So one time he got perfect peace as the forecast, and immediately he was in complete anxiety. Because as soon as you get peace, you know what's going to happen next. Something's going to break the peace. So that's the nature of the material world. So here's Prabhupada's purport. Please listen. Although Vasudeva Vipra was a leper and had suffered greatly, still, after Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu had cured him, he instructed him to preach Krishna consciousness. Indeed, the only return the Lord wanted was that Vasudeva preach the instructions of Krishna and liberate all human beings. And that isn't easy, to be determined to do it, to burst into someone's bubble of their consciousness when they don't want anyone to burst into their bubble. You don't always get a warm welcome. Indeed, the only return the Lord wanted was that Vasudeva preach the instructions of Krishna and liberate all living beings. That is the process of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Each and every member of this society was rescued from a very abominable condition. But now they're engaged in preaching the cult of Krishna consciousness. They are not only cured of the disease called materialism, but are also living a very happy life. Everyone accepts them as great devotees of Krishna, and their qualities are manifest in their very faces. If one wants to be recognized as a devotee by Krishna, he should take to preaching work, following the advice of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Then one will undoubtedly attain the lotus feet of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Lord Krishna himself, without delay. So Prabhupada does make it quite clear that he wanted his followers to preach and help others. And help others. Help oneself and help others. After continuing, and we'll end quite soon this. We'll finish the chapter. It's called, this is Krishna's Kaviraj, right? After instructing the Brahmin Vasudeva in that way, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu disappeared from that place. Then the two Brahmanas, Koma and Vasudeva, embraced each other and began to cry, remembering the transcendental qualities of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Thus I have described how Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu reclaimed the leper Vasudeva and also received the name Vasudevamrita Prada. And that is the name that Sri Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya put in his verses describing Mahaprabhu. Thus I end my description of the beginning of the tour of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, his visiting the temple of Koma and his liberating the leper Brahmin Vasudeva. One who hears these pastimes of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu with great faith will surely very soon attain the lotus feet of Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Purport. When a person actually revives his consciousness with thoughts of Krishna by the mercy of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he revives his spiritual life and becomes addicted to the service of the Lord. Only then can he act as an acharya. In other words, everyone should engage in preaching, following in the footsteps of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. In this way, one will be very much appreciated by Lord Krishna and will quickly be recognized by him. Actually, a devotee of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu must engage in preaching in order to increase the followers of the Lord. By thus preaching actual Vedic knowledge all over the world, one will benefit all mankind. Next verse. Kaviraj Goswami says, I admit that I do not know the beginning or the end of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. However, whatever I have written, I have heard from the mouths of great personalities. O devotees, please do not consider my offenses in this regard. Your lotus feet are my only shelter. Praying at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa and Sri Radhanath, always desiring their mercy, I, Krishnadas, narrate Sri Caitanya Caritamrta, following in their footsteps. Thus in the Bhaktivedanta purport to Sri Caitanya Caritamrta, Madhya Lila, 7th chapter, describing the start of the Lord's tour of South India and the liberation of the Brahmin Vasudeva. Any questions or comments? Rudy, do you have any questions or comments?
Nothing specific.
Kristen?
Well, I thought it was lovely to hear that we, shouldn't become proud, and just to have that discussed this morning was just really great. Our ego wants to make us proud at certain moments, and that was just really grounding to hear.
And the universe refuses. It undermines our pride. It refuses to cooperate with our concept that we are the central, perfect figure in existence. The universe refuses. to cooperate with that. And it's actually it's very difficult for a human being to accept that all we could ever be is insignificant servants of servants of servants. That's all we could ever be. All the top positions are already occupied. There's no moving up the ladder. In fact, we're supposed to move down the ladder. And just like the negative pole is attracted to the positive pole is attracted to the negative pole of a magnet. So Krishna becomes attracted to the devotee who's actually in a humble mood, and still a humble servant mood. Quite astounding. So how also not to confuse that with low self-esteem and be, I'm so humble, I'm so full, and I'm so incapable, I can't do anything. So when one is a servant, one depends on the power of the master, and not to dwell on how bad we are all the time. That's low self-esteem, and that's I call that neurotic, self-indulgent tendencies. Rather, one should just touch upon that we're insignificant, and then be in the mood of depending on Krishna's mercy. Easy to talk about it, but the mind doesn't like it. It's bitter medicine for the mind. And then what to speak of? Then being bold enough to say to Krishna, how can I serve you? And I say bold enough because what happens if he tells us? And you just asked him, how can I serve you? And then he tells you, he gives you some hint of what you should do, then you have to do it. And he said, yeah, but another appointment right now. Yeah, but. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Maharaj, Vasudev Brahmana was unfortunate materially, so materially he was not stable, he was suffering. And then a practicing devotee might not be stable in his spiritual practices also. And here materially he is exhausted.
Very delicate position. You practicing devotees it's like living on the shore of the ocean. You know, the waves can come this way, or sometimes you feel like you're in right now. So what's the solution? Is that what you're asking, or you?
Yeah, and that's what we should do.
You stay in association of devotees, and then it's sadhana, and hold on tight. Because the waves of our karma don't always treat us gently. So the question is, where do you go for shelter? And that's the blessing and the curse of the material energy's difficulties. Is that we want to learn to whatever happens externally, whatever happens to internally, call out to Krishna. For shelter and help. So that takes faith, it takes control of the mind, takes fear sometimes to have nowhere else to go. But yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it?
And then what should be his source of happiness?
Holding on to the lotus feet of Krishna and being secure in that. That, if there's no happiness in that, we're probably not holding on tight enough. I think part of what you're saying is that we're dutiful and we try to do the right thing. But doing the right thing isn't sufficient. Doing the right thing because we're supposed to do it isn't sufficient to give us the spiritual happiness that can have us withstand the difficulties of material existence and at the same time be happy in the material world, even though in the material world. So that takes spiritual happiness, spiritual shelter, good chanting, good hearing, good association, serving in a proper mood. Because seva doesn't mean work. It means an offering. And to do it right in the very beginning is one thing, but to do it every day, every day, every day. Oh, I have to be in a good mood today. I have to depend on Krishna today. And that's so. And it's a bit of an unnatural imposition on material consciousness. But then we go in front of the deities and express our hearts and beg for shelter and some sincere prayer, some sincere taking shelter, sincere chanting, sincere hearing, sincere serving, sincere association. What do you think?
Basically, follow the 9 processes with faith and determination. That's what I get out of it.
Hold on tight. Prabhupada told the story of that Mahatma Gandhi told in his autobiography that he had a fight with his wife. Even Mahatma Gandhi fights with his wife. So he said, get out. Nowadays, you'd have to get out. So he, get out, I don't want to see you again. Go away. And then after a few minutes, there's a knock on the door. It's you! I thought I told you to go away. Why do you come back? And she replied, I have nowhere else to go. And then, of course, he let her, brought her back in. And of course, they made up and lived happily ever after. But when one, it may be hard, maybe this, maybe that, but if we just accept we have nowhere else to go, Krishna will let us in. Again. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
So the tension between the Vani and the Vapu here, that they wanted to go with Lord Chaitanya and he said, no, you stay, you'll be okay. But on a very external level, I think they would have been more Krishna conscious if they'd been with him and gone with him, and it seems almost like, you know what I mean?
No, finish the sentence. It seems almost as if...
Like it's like the second best option is you stay here and chant and you'll be with me. It's kind of, you know.
You mean just putting them off, you mean?
Yeah. And I'm sure you experienced that with Prabhupada.
Well, one time Prabhupada said, I always want to be with, when it was Gurudas who said to Prabhupada, I always want to be with you. And Prabhupada said, I always want to be by your lotus feet. He said, my lotus feet are always moving. So there's many ways to look at it. From one point of view, Mahaprabhu, right in the beginning, he said, I want to go alone. Because he had a service to do and he wanted to practice austerities, he wanted to do this. So if everyone who wanted to come with him came with Vasudeva, this would have had hundreds of thousands of people continuously, then he wouldn't be acting, could no longer do his service, that what he wanted to do as a sannyasi. That's one point. And that's actually what happened when he went to, he was going to Vrindavan, going to Ramakeli, and then, he spoke to Sanatana Goswami and said, this isn't the way to go to Vrindavan. And it's not the way to go on it. Because they're all going to be, what do you need? Do you want this? You know, here's this. We'll arrange the place for you to stay, and we'll arrange, you know, a big 100 preparation feast for you every day. And, you know, it's not what Mahaprabhu was the example that he was showing either. So that's from one side, from his side. But from the point of view of the person who wants to go with the great devotee, there's the romantic idea of I want to be with him, but it's not easy. To be with fire, you have to be fire yourself. You have to be on the level of full surrender, and you have to be able to adopt his mood in every way. So, in one sense, we don't know exactly. We can't say Mahaprabhu told him to stay because he didn't want a lot of people with him, or he didn't think he was qualified, but maybe he just wanted to teach through him. This is how he preached. This is what he did in every place, not only there. What do you think? Would you have rather? But there's another side too. When Krishna called when the wives of the Brahmins came to Krishna, he satisfied them with sweet words and then told them to go back. And they went back. And when the gopis came to Krishna, he satisfied with sweet words, them with sweet words, and told them to go back, and they didn't go back. So there's many ways to look at it. But then again, that's what Mahaprabhu told Vasudeva, and then Vasudeva came with him the next day. And then basically Mahaprabhu started leaving and he fainted. That's one way to get your way to when you're Mahaprabhu. He just fainted. Just imagine the consciousness of the person who you can't tolerate being separate from Mahaprabhu. And then when he's leaving, he just faint. Your consciousness leaves your body as Mahaprabhu is leaving his association. And another way to look at it, do you think that Mahaprabhu is... One could think that he's just telling him that, oh, don't worry, I'll be Aga. I'll be with you. But do you think he actually stayed with him? So then you get onto a really deeper level that Mahaprabhu stayed in his association by following the Vani. And Prabhupada gave that example too, that, you know, that I'm always with my Guru Maharaj. He said that, oh, he's always with me because I'm not alone. So it's really a matter of consciousness, and then you speak about it on so many different levels. And when Krishna leaves Vrindavan, there was only, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, only Yasoda, Maya, and a few others were feeling separation from Krishna, that Krishna wasn't there, and they were experiencing that, and the rest were experiencing Krishna through his uppercut pastimes. The channel had been made by their love for him. So it's an interesting topic. Okay. Happy Mother's Day. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Caitanya Caritamrta ki jai. Caitanya Caritamrta ki jai.